So Withers' photograph, it seems to me, leaves unresolved tension between an emptiness that seems to indicate the racial order's dangerous efficacy on the one hand, and on the other, a disarray that indicates the potential of resistance to it. This ambiguity is resolved in one direction by the photograph's placement within reflections, within the exhibition publication space of reflections in black, where it is aligned with the collection's emphasis on agency. On the wall of the exhibit, and the page of the accompanying volume, the photograph is placed underneath a far more celebrated photograph by Ernest Withers, this one of the Memphis sanitation workers strike in 1968, an event that gained notoriety for bringing Martin Luther King Jr. to the city in which he was assassinated. The juxtaposition, this is now a page of the book as a collection, of the two Memphis scenarios recontextualizes both, creating the impression that the segregated waiting room with its door propped open has been emptied by the men who have gone above, seemingly upstairs, to stand united in protest. In this context, the single powerful statement produced by the horizontal line of demonstrators brandishing their "I am a man" placards, the slogan created by the community on the move for equality to talk back to bosses about unfair employment practices, talks back as well to the emasculating effects of segregation that fashion, among many others, had documented 30 years earlier. Rather than being annihilated by the signage in the colored waiting room, the juxtaposition suggests its targets have stopped waiting and regrouped elsewhere. Inscription has been reinscribed in a narrative of collective agency that mandates taking sign production in one's own hands. This is sign production within limits, of course. The juxtaposition of these photographs makes explicit the implicit gendering of the Jim Crow archive. The lone woman, and she's easier to see on the extreme left of that photograph, in the photograph of the sanitation strike, neither entirely inside nor outside the frame, raises the question of what, if any, place there is for women in a picture overdetermined by a discourse that articulates the claims for economic justice through an assertion of manhood, an assertion provoked by the perception that the burden of segregation took a special toll of men. In Jim Crow's visual archive, the stigma of race is represented almost entirely on the bodies of African American men, constructed as the site of paralysis and occasionally, I'd say, Cecil Williams photographed the possibility for the future. You would not know from the visual archive of Jim Crow that African American women drank from segregated drinking fountains or sat in segregated waiting rooms, although obviously they did. A perception that originated with northern white men, male photographers, set the terms for the response of African American photographers in accordance with what Foucault calls the first law of the archive, the law of what can be said. It is a law that appears to govern visual archives as well. Women could not be worked into meaningful visual statements within the Jim Crow archive because of the system of enunciability that structured it, a system whose construction of racial oppression as masculine humiliation transformed an overtly racial archive into a covertly gendered one. Nevertheless, my final comment, the vertical alignment of the two photographs by Ernest Withers engages a property of the photographic archive that differentiates it from a system of enunciability. There is a certain paradox here. The strategy of juxtaposition that brings into view the masculine subject or the masculinity of the subject of the Jim Crow archive makes use of the material dimension of the photographic archive, material dimensions such as positionality, contiguity, size, color, scale, contrast, texture. I notice the black background here is one of the signifying features of this particular wall or page. These material properties that are outside the realm of textual archives. Might we want to read this materiality as an operation of the feminine at the level of exhibition rather than subject matter? That's the question. I see, I'm not going to answer that question, I'll pose it. I see both the appeal and the hazards of doing that. I'll just let that run. But I would propose that the question of engendering archives be framed to encompass material as well as conceptual relations, especially for photographs that unsettle the distinction between historical document and work of of art, archive, and museum, and thus between the contents of the archive and the environment.